All right, greetings, friends. I figured we'd go ahead and do a little bit of Bible study, even though everybody isn't together today. I'm going to do like a quick little video. I'm assuming that you watched the video from the Bible Project about Joshua, the book of Joshua. If not, stop what you're doing and go watch that. Do homework first. It does a pretty good job of kind of explaining away. A little problems I had with reading it was like it's very violent, and then if you're used to reading the Gospels and about Jesus and it's like love your neighbor and everything, like this part of the Bible, especially Joshua, seems pretty violent at first, but if you kind of understand the context a little bit, it's a little bit more helpful to digest it and everything. Okay, so there's so many different directions I kind of went with the book of Joshua, just to pick out like certain topics just to dive in on and everything. But a few things just I want you guys to notice and kind of like pick up on if you end up reading it and everything is, of course, everybody knows about the walls of Jericho and everything, but a cool poetic repetition that happens in the book is at first, as the Israelites is crossing the River Jordan, it's very much like Joshua's predecessor Moses with crossing the Red Sea, back when they were captives of Egypt and everything. They needed to cross the water. This is also going to repeat again in the Gospels when Jesus needs to go into Jerusalem and everything. So and just crossing waters, just pick up on that and everything. That's going to be an ongoing repetitive thing in the Bible. So another form of poetic repetition is happening with a main character named Rahab, who is in the book of Joshua, and she hangs this red rope from the window. This is obviously just direct repetition from the Exodus story when Moses commands the Israelites to paint the blood of the lamb onto the doorways for Passover and everything on the last plague of Egypt and everything. So this is a direct repetition from that. And it sort of means the same thing. There is going to be a battle that is happening on Jericho. She is from Jericho. Her window is actually part of the wall. I'm pretty sure that's the case, part of the wall of Jericho, and she wants to protect her family because, she's cool with the Israelites and everything, even though she's a member of Jericho and everything, and she wants to protect her family whenever this battle happens. So they told her to do this as a sign to hang this cord out the window and everything to, don't attack this family and everything, protect them. So the first thing that I like to focus on and do a deep dive on. And this is one of my favorite moments of the Bible. This is super interesting. But Joshua is confronted by possibly an angel. It just says a commander of the Lord's army and everything. Could be God itself in just like a different form and everything. It doesn't really go into detail what exactly it is, other than it's just a commander of the Lord's army. And then when Joshua asks, this is like right preparing for the battle and everything. The walls are getting ready to come down in Jericho. And Joshua asks this angel, are you on my side or are you on the enemy side? And the angel replied, neither, which just, to me, it just blows my mind. It just shows that for me, God needs to do what God's going to do. And sometimes we can always think that we're on God's side, and sometimes we can always claim that we're the right ones when somebody else is the wrong. And it's kind of like not our place to do that. We are designed to not judge each other and everything. Let God handle that, and God just needs to do what God needs to do. So the angel says, neither. I'm on neither side. I'm going to do what I need to do. What is super interesting is right after that, the angel asked Joshua to take off his sandals and set them aside, for this is now holy ground, which is obviously another awesome repetitive poetic repetition from when Moses at the burning bush, God asked him to do the same thing. Take off your sandals, for this is holy ground that you stand. This is a very awesome moment because it is described as Jericho and the Canaanites have just become the ultimate evil. They just fell. Apparently the Canaanites, they've been kind of doing their own thing. You'll learn from the video that they're known for doing child sacrifice and just horrendous people, and they've been doing this for 400 years, ever since the Israelites have been in captivity at Egypt and everything. So this has been going on, and then the Israelites finally get out of Egypt, and God is kind of using the Israelites just to be they're chosen people to go across your land and be something. So at this moment, Jericho is being cleansed and it's being changed. Like, this place was, a horrible place full of horrible people. And now this angel is claiming that it's holy ground enough to where, like, you need to take your shoes off and respect that. The thing about clothing that I think both in the ancient world and the modern world, clothing represents ourselves. We speak, this is a cool shirt about guitar pedals and everything. He was like, I like guitars. I got guitars in the background and everything. But our clothing, we use it to identify ourselves and everything. There's a bunch of people that have a closet full of shoes. I'm not one of those people, but I'm sure somebody knows somebody who's like that. Sherlock Holmes could look at a man's shoes and deduct what type of person someone is just by looking at their shoes, just because, like, whether, if they're scuffy or dirty or if they're super nice. You pretty much tell, like, what kind of job title somebody has and everything, especially back in the day and everything. So, like, when the angel of the Lord asks you to, like, respect a holy place, you want to take what is earthly to you and what you think is important to you, and you want to kind of, like, set that aside, and that is your shoes and your clothing and everything. In the story of Jonah, there's a evil king that's over an evil nation, and that's the whole point of Jonah, is like Jonah is supposed to preach against this nation, this town of Nineveh, and eventually the king recognizes his evil ways and decides to take off his crown and in his clothing, who represents him as a king. I'm sure it's all fancy with gold and jewels and everything, but he puts on sackcloth and he sits in ashes, which is, it represents the saying from Genesis. Is like we're all come from dust, and to dust we will return one day, and everything kind of puts us on the same level. It's a very humbling experience and everything, and that's what the king of Nineveh did, which is like one of the biggest cities of the ancient world and everything. So that's just something, like, when you need to, like I said, when you need to set aside space for holy space, whether it's prayer or like a event, you want to, like, take yourself out of it and out of your earthly kind of self and just be a part of the people and to be a part of God. In order to do that, sometimes you got to take off your shoes and respect a holy ground. Controversial subject. May 8th, a new Pope, Leo the 14th, was elected, and I watch a lot of YouTube and everything, and immediately I was getting served videos on whether this new pope is going to be a progressive or a conservative pope. And those two terms have been, like, weaponized to the point that I think we don't let popes or even small town preachers do what needs to be done and say what needs to be said, because sometimes the Bible can seem progressive sometimes, and sometimes it can seem very conservative at the time. Sometimes, and we weaponize these terms to the point that we can't. Sometimes we have a hard time letting the Bible just exist what it is. God is what He is. When he told Moses to take off his shoes, he described himself as like, I am what I am. God doesn't want to have to describe himself as like, I am progressive today and conservative tomorrow. No, God needs to do what God needs to do. And preachers and popes need to do what they need to do. Sometimes they're going to seem progressive, and sometimes they're going to seem conservative. So sometimes you need to take your shoes off and set those aside and respect the holy ground, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, so a second part that I really want to focus on and do a deep dive on is Rahab. Long story short, she is a prostitute, but she is also a relative of Jesus. That helps. She helps the Israelite spies to infiltrate Jericho before the battle. A lot of preachers and commentators like to use this example as somebody who is sort of like horrible, but because of her occupation, but by faith alone she is saved. Which, like, I don't want to, like, take that out of the equation, because like, being saved by faith alone is something and everything. But let's just dive down a little bit more and like think about this character, and let's try to expand it a little bit and try to give her just a little bit more respect. I know it seems kind of crazy to respect a prostitute, but let's flex our minds a little bit. Has anybody ever seen the movie Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome? Max lives in a post-apocalyptic world in which society has broken down to its primitive state. So, think about like in biblical times, this is, in Mad Max, this is the future, and everything is like fell apart, and everybody's just being tribal and in primitive, and in biblical times is sort of like the same thing and stuff. Max ends up helping a group of children make a pilgrimage through the desert to a promised land. Next, while doing this, he needs to steal some vehicles from Tina Turner, who just happens to be a queen of this harsh city. There within this harsh city, he fights a giant, and as he sneaks around, he just happens to go inside this slave camp under the city, and he's there planning his escape. He's kind of infiltrating Jericho in a way. He's trying to plan his escape to get to the promised land. While he is in the slave camp, he meets a man named Pig Killer. He confronts him and helps him. The Pig Killer recognizes Max's role as a freedom fighter, and he is in wonder and awe. He says like crazy things, like, he asks him, "Who are you?" and everything. It's like, I can see like things are happening, like, you're going against these people, and the wheels are turning, and I think he says something like the dice is rolling, I can feel it and everything. So he recognizes that there's something happening here, and Max is a part of it. The man is named Pig Killer because he stole a pig from the city, and he's trying to feed his family, just trying to do that. The pig is actual property of the city because the city uses pigs. They use the poop from the pigs for methane. There's a whole story behind that in the movie and everything. But just recognize that the pig is the city's property, and this man was just trying to feed his children, so he stole a pig and he slaughtered it to feed his children. And because of this, it's hard to see in the picture that I think I'll probably put up in a video somewhere, but he actually has tattooed, it's either tattooed or branded, I can't remember, but it says Pig Killer across his chest and everything. I don't believe that this man chose to do this life of slavery, and because of the Pig Killer situation, he get thrown in jail, and he has to serve as a slave in this dungeon, shoveling the pig poop actually, and he has to do that for the rest of his life. And he explains to Max that, like, it's not that big a deal because people only live about 2 years down here. It's a rough life and everything. So, like Rahab, I don't think the Pig Killer chose this occupation. I think because of this harsh city and this harsh environment and this world that he grew up in, he was pushed to do this kind of occupation. And I don't think Rahab, I don't think she woke up one day and it was like, oh, I'm a free spirit and I'm going to do a life of prostitution because that seems fun. That almost never happens anyway. So, and an interesting part of the story of Rahab is that she wants to protect her family, and she describes like she has a hang this rope and everything to protect her family. So she is a family-oriented person. She at least knows of them and loves them. So it's not like she's some kind of runaway and this is what she wanted to do. It was like, I believe that she is, in my mind, she is forced to do this. So, and maybe it's not the best to think of her as just a straight prostitute and everything, and that she just happened to make this right choice when the Israelites came to infiltrate the city and everything. I think a proper way to honor Rahab is to recognize that in the world that she grew up in, like, that was one of the choices that she had to make just to survive and everything. And the fact that Jericho has to fall per God's order because this angel shows up and says, I'm going to do what I'm going to do and everything. I think God recognizes that too. This is a life that she grew up in, and in her mind, she's probably the only situation that she had just to feed her family and everything. And God's not going to put up with that. If that's a city that you're going to grow up in, then that's a city that no longer exists in God's kingdom. This is basically why Sodom and Gomorrah got obliterated. It's because of sins like that. It's just a disrespect for each other and everything, and nobody's going to live a godly life in a city like that. One way to really respect the name of Rahab is to go online and find, in just a quick search, you can find these organizations like Rahab Ministries and Rahab's Rope and Rahab's Daughters. Rahab Ministries is an organization that is against sex trafficking, and so is Rahab's Rope, is an organization that works against sex trafficking. Rahab's Daughters is more like a safe house for women in need and everything. So this is a more respectful way to think about Rahab, and I kind of like the fact that these ministries are honoring her name by, nobody ever wants to take sex trafficking as an occupation. Obviously, you are a victim of sex trafficking and everything, and I believe that Rahab is a victim of the city and everything, much like the pig killer in this crazy movie that I'm talking about and everything. To tie this all back to Jesus, we'll look at John 8 for just a quick second, and this is the part where Jesus stops these religious leaders from stoning a woman because she committed the crime of adultery, which obviously is a sex act and everything. He tells this woman to sin no more, so obviously he's against this adultery thing. But it seems like he's not willing to put her to death because it isn't her. What she does, her occupation, is not a part of the problem. It's more of the sin is the problem. Don't hate the problem, hate the sin and everything. And this world that he's living in, this world that, well, actually they're both living in it, but this world that she's living in, she assumes that that's something that she's either needs to do or got talked into or just wanted to do on her own, and it's allowed in this world. But in this new kingdom that Jesus is talking about, he was like, no, there's no need for that and everything. So there's no reason to stone the lady for that. Jesus is more concerned about getting to the root to the problem and solving the problem. He's more concerned about destroying Jericho. Looking at Matthew 5, I'm just going to read straight from the verses here, and this is Jesus speaking. You have heard it said, you should not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone that even looks at a lady lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So again, he's not putting the blame on the lady right here. Like he's saying the one who looks at the lady lustfully, has already committed adultery. He's looking at the heart. He's looking at the root of the problem, which is like somebody already looking at somebody and thinking about what they could do with the person, So just remember in conclusion that in Jesus' kingdom, his ministry is focused on helping those who are in need. And by doing that, he imagines a kingdom that is nothing like Jericho. And in his kingdom, there was never even be a need for a woman to have to do something like a sinful act just to get by and feed her family and take care of her family and everything. In Jesus' kingdom, she's going to be taken care of because in Jesus' kingdom, we take care of the people who are in need and everything. One thing that maybe we want to ask ourselves in our thoughts and our prayers and as we walk across on our streets and be a part of the world is our world like this? Is our world like Jericho? Obviously there's sex trafficking going on. Obviously there's prostitution going on. There are all kinds of people just trying to get by, and in order to do that, sometimes they steal and they lie and they're cheating and they're doing acts that are uncalled for just to feed their own family and just to get to the next day. And the kingdom that has to come, there's no need for that, because what we need to do is actually to care for our neighbor and to love our enemy and to take care of these small deeds. That way there is no need for a Jericho. And hopefully in this new world that is to come, there won't even be a need of any organizations with Rahab's name attached to it. Peace be with you.